Yeah, we can wait probably till like just before 7 to start letting people in. So there's a few people waiting. It's always awkward if you accidentally start letting people in. There's like one person. Thanks again for helping with this webinar.
No problem. I kind of wanted to come anyways to see about your survey results.
Me too.
That works out then.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I tried to make it not dry. So hopefully it will succeed in that fact.
Yeah. Oh, I think I know who Sonia is.
Oh yeah.
It's probably Sonia from Dieppe.
Okay.
Maybe. Is there another Sonia?
I'm just seeing if we actually have a Sonia signed up.
We do. Sonia
We do.
Hines Hints.
Maybe not the same Sonia.
We can probably start letting people in. So I'll give it a couple minutes after 7 or get started.
Okay. I will admit them then.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Merci pour votre participation ce soir. On va commencer dans quelques minutes.
Hi. Hey, Lily. Hi, Tim.
Hello. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. There might still be people joining us, but I'm going to get started. Welcome to the session to share the results of our public survey of opinion on nature-based climate solutions. My name is Lillian Barraclough, and I am the project coordinator for the Research and Knowledge Initiative supporting climate risk mitigation for municipalities with nature-based and natural infrastructure with the New Brunswick Environmental Network. Bonsoir tout le monde. Merci pour votre participation ce soir. Je m'appelle Lily Barraclough et
So
je suis
repeating the same thing now in French.
d'initiative de recherche de connaissances avec le réseau environnemental du Nouveau-Brunswick. Bienvenue à la session pour partager les résultats du sondage sur l'opinion publique des solutions climatiques basées sur la nature. We have simultaneous interpretation available this evening. The vast majority of the presentation this evening will be in English. If you would like to listen to all of the talking this evening in English, including any questions and discussion, you can select on the interpretation button on the bottom right of your screen, English. Et si vous voulez écouter cet événement aujourd'hui en français, vous pouvez cliquer sur le
Repeating
bouton
the same instructions now in French.
en bas à droite, puis sélectionnez French pour écouter en français. Before I get started, I want to acknowledge that I am presenting to you today from Mi'kmaq, the unceded and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. But the New Brunswick Environmental Network works across the land of the Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqey, and Passamaquoddy peoples. And when we're discussing adapting to and mitigating climate change, it's incredibly important even more important to ensure that we're doing so from a stance of decolonization and fostering reconciliation and reparations with the Indigenous people of this land, especially in looking at nature-based climate solutions, which draw on many of the learnings and traditional ways of being of Indigenous peoples with the land in response to the changing climate. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the New Brunswick Environmental Network, we are a communication network that was established in 1991, and we link over 110 nonprofit environmental organizations across the province. And our member groups and interested individuals form caucuses and collaboratives on different areas of interest, including climate adaptation. And the work in this research and knowledge initiative comes out of the Climate Adaptation Collaborative, and also builds on past work that the NBEN took part in along with our partners at NatureBased and many other organizations in the province in the building regional adaptation capacity and expertise, which looked at providing training for engineers and planners and practitioners in the province on nature-based climate solutions. And one thing that was really identified in that work during the BRACE project was that there was a need to have more supports in place for municipalities to move into implementing nature-based climate solutions, that there was a lot of interest and desire to succeed in having nature-based solutions, but kind of those missing steps in between. And that's where this project is mainly focused. And I'll delve into that more in a little bit. And we don't run this project alone. We mentioned earlier regarding the BRACE project, we've continued to work very closely with our partners at NatureBased. And we're also supported by an advisory committee with representatives from Climate Atlantic, Infrastructure Canada, the New Brunswick Climate Change Secretariat, the Union of New Brunswick Municipalities, and l'Association francophone des municipalités du Nouveau-Brunswick. The public survey results that I'll be sharing with you tonight are only one component of this project. The end goal of the Research and Knowledge Initiative is to develop a cost-benefit analysis tool that can be applied in municipal decision-making to decide between a human-made and a nature-based solution to respond to flooding, both in coastal areas and inland flooding. And to work towards the development of this tool, we first held engagement sessions in communities throughout the province to really understand what challenges municipalities have faced in approaching nature-based climate solutions, what information they're missing, what they're interested in terms of what co-benefits or value these projects can hold in their community, and how we can best support them with the work that we're doing. We held sessions in Dieppe, Fredericton, Quispamsis, Edmundston, and a webinar with the Union of Municipalities of New Brunswick. The survey of public opinion that I'll be delving in tonight was another component of really understanding what the public's knowledge and understanding of nature-based climate solutions is, and what their desire for them is, support level of support. And the results from both the public survey of opinion and the engagement sessions are accumulating in the developing the context and regional appropriability of the cost benefit analysis tool. So before I share more of the results of the public survey of opinion, I just want to take a brief moment, and I'll be launching a poll to kind of understand who's in the room tonight, what area of work or interest you're joining us from. So I'm going to launch the poll, and it should show up on your screen. And if you just take a moment to respond, and then just get a sense of who's here. All right, so I see everyone has answered, and interesting to see that's mostly other NGOs here in the room, with some resident representation. So thank you all for coming tonight and giving us a bit more of a sense of who's here. And I look forward to hearing any of your questions and comments at the end, and maybe have a bit of a good discussion. So probably you all are familiar with the fact that we are experiencing many impacts of the changing climate here in New Brunswick already. That's probably what has brought you here this evening, and what has stimulated your interest in nature-based climate solutions to begin with. Some of the more notable ones are, the recent impacts of Hurricane Fiona across the Atlantic provinces. But we're also seeing more variations in temperatures in all seasons, but particularly warmer winters and hotter, drier summers. We're also, in many coastal areas, experiencing a lot of erosion, the impacts of sea level rise and storm surges. And as a result of increased rainfall and increased frequency and severity of extreme weather events like hurricanes and storms, there's a large risk of flooding in many areas of the province. And these effects are going to continue to worsen. And so it's incredibly important that we talk about, and not only talk about, but get into place solutions that will be the most effective in mitigating these effects of climate change and providing benefits to communities and non-human species as well. There are two main types and delineations of infrastructure to respond to these impacts of climate change. The first are called gray or conventional infrastructure, and this is what we've traditionally used in a human-made engineered environment to respond to flooding or stormwater surge or erosion, that use materials that are completely human fabricated and often have a large environmental impact, including seawalls, dams, culverts, and pipes. And these are often also primarily used as barriers between the water body, for instance, if it's the ocean, and the community that might be impacted by the flooding. Whereas nature-based or natural infrastructure works with the strengths and capacities of nature. And what that means is that instead of completely building a new infrastructure from scratch that tries to really create that barrier, nature-based solutions build on the pre-existing ecosystems or that we have that help to respond to these impacts, including wetlands, forests, living shorelines, or they also take elements of those natural areas and ecosystems and pair them with human-made initiatives through hybrid infrastructure or create new areas of things like rain gardens or parks to help mitigate the effects of flooding. In the public survey of opinion, we recognize that many people would be responding to it with little to no knowledge of what nature-based solutions might entail. And to try to mitigate the confusion or the potential for malinformed responses, we provided a definition of nature-based solutions, which is up here on the slide. And that is that nature-based solutions are actions to protect, sustainably manage, or restore natural ecosystems that address societal challenges such as climate change, human health, food and water security, and disaster risk reduction effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. But we know that that's still a bit wordy and has some jargon. So we also included a couple infographics that hopefully illustrate those benefits and pieces of nature-based solutions. And this one that we used illustrates the fact that nature-based solutions incorporate restoring natural areas and ecosystems. They're very issue specific and depend on what climate impact the community is facing. They involve building infrastructure. They involve long-term and significant management to ensure its long-term efficacy, and involves protection of natural spaces and of communities. And as a whole, nature-based solutions can help solve the societal challenges of climate change, food security, water access and quality, reductions of risk due to natural disasters, human health, and socioeconomic development, ultimately leading to solutions that are not only good for the environment and biodiversity, but also for human well-being. I think you were shared this link in the chat, but we host a community of practice on nature-based and natural infrastructure that was developed initially during the BRACE project that I mentioned earlier. And what you can see when you go on to this community practice and look at our map of nature-based climate solutions is that these do exist. There are many projects and examples throughout New Brunswick and the rest of Atlantic Canada, and they are seeing successes as well, although there is still a large gap in accessing them and having them be implemented on a large scale. And on our community of practice, you can also get a sense of the variety of different types of nature-based solutions, including, valuating and ensuring economic and social valuation of wetland ecosystem services, green roofs or living roofs, natural brook restoration, dune restoration, and things like naturalized stormwater management ponds. So I'm curious, and I'm going to start another poll. Are you aware of any nature-based solutions in your community? At least I think I'm going to launch it. Actually, the poll at the moment is, now I figured it out. Now it will launch. So if you can respond whether you are or you're not certain, and if you are aware of any in your community, if you could share in the chat what that project is and what it's responding to, we'd love to hear a bit more about, what you're seeing in your communities throughout the province, wherever you're joining us from today. For those of you that have answered yes, please do share in the chat what nature-based climate projects are you familiar with that exist in your community. So just give it a couple more moments there. Thank you, Sabine. We're seeing in the chat in Sackville, there's naturalized stormwater management, rain gardens, and a rooftop garden. You'll have noticed potentially on the last slide that the living green roof was indeed from Sackville. A retention pond in Dieppe, close to the pool. All right, well, give it a couple more moments before we move on. Now, maybe it takes a little while to think of an example in your community. Another retention pond. It's good to know that there are quite a few that people are familiar with. Many rain gardens in Moncton, Riverview, and Dieppe. All right, well, feel free to keep sharing in the chat as you think of any other examples. And thank you for participating in the poll. With that, I'm going to delve right into those in-depth results that you're here tonight to hear about. So our public survey of opinion had 663 online respondents. And it was fielded for about 10 days from February 14th to 26th of this year with an 8-minute average completion. So we wanted to make sure that it wasn't too strenuous of a survey to complete so that we could get as wide a response as possible. And our response was representative of the population here in New Brunswick. We had a good gender representation as well as a good range across the different age groups. And you'll notice that our breakdown of Anglophone to Francophone respondents was representative of the main demographics here in the province as well. And we also had a wide variety of different education levels, from those who had less than high school to many who had graduated high school, many as well that had graduated community or technical college, and with some who graduated university or have postgraduate degrees. And we worked with public polling firm called Narrative Research, which is based here in Atlantic Canada. And they draw from a pool of respondents who encompass these different demographics to ensure we have as representative a sample as possible. The first question that we asked in the public survey of opinion were given a few of the pressing issues facing our communities today. What are people most concerned about? And although climate change is not ranked the highest ranked issue, those issues that are higher ranked, the cost of groceries, the cost of buying a house or renting an apartment, and poverty, are all those that would be exacerbated by climate change. We've already seen major impacts in New Brunswick agriculture due to climate change, whether it be from the hotter, drier seasons, which are intermixed with periods of extreme rainfall and flooding, the major unpredictability of temperatures and climate and levels of rainfall, failure of crops due to these unpredictable conditions, the challenge in knowing when risk of frost is, as well as high levels of soil erosion in different parts of the province. Housing costs and availabilities are also impacted and will continue to be impacted by climate change. One of the most prevalent future impacts. It might be that some areas of the province are going to become unlivable due to levels of coastal erosion and rising sea levels, which might mean that whole communities will have to be relocated. We'll also be facing an influx of climate refugees from other parts of Canada, as well as other countries who come to seek refuge. And we need to be able to provide housing, not only to those who are already here, but to those who will have to come due to the level of climate impact in their homes. And both of these past things, the cost of groceries, the cost of buying a house or apartment, which will be exacerbated by climate change, will also exacerbate the levels of poverty due to increased cost of living and loss of livelihood. So although climate change is not that top concern, it is indicative that people are already feeling these side effects of climate change. And the majority of respondents are very concerned about the impacts of climate change. And we asked following that, of these potential impacts that are experienced in New Brunswick due to climate change, which have people experienced the most? And you'll see again that increased cost of food is the most highly ranked. But beyond that, respondents noted that they have experienced warmer winter temperatures, higher winds than normal, increased frequency and severity of storms. And what I thought was quite notable and interesting is that despite the fact that we recently were hit with Hurricane Fiona here in Atlantic Canada, and the hurricanes were not ranked higher in what people felt they've been impacted by in the past few years, as well as flooding was not ranked all that high, despite the fact that flooding is one of the largest risks both in inland areas of the province and in coastal areas. And I thought it was also notable that you'll see both for erosion and drought that many responded that they didn't know or were unsure if their community was being impacted by it. And so this speaks to a little bit of a level of the need for education around what is happening already in terms of how climate change is impacting communities. This next question, I feel, is one of the most significant results coming out of the public survey of opinion. We asked on a scale of 1 to 10, how prepared did respondents feel to deal with the impacts of climate change on a personal level, how prepared they feel the provincial government in New Brunswick is, and how prepared they feel their local municipal government is. And overall, respondents do not feel prepared to respond to the impacts of climate change. However, on a personal level, only 78, when I say only, that it is much lower than the other two, 78% feel unprepared to respond to the impacts of climate change. Whereas and in this note, I'll just note that we framed feeling prepared completely as that like 8 to 10 score out of 10. So there is still a large majority of the respondents who feel moderately prepared in that like 5 to 7 out of 10 range. But on the provincial government and municipal government scale, only 12% of respondents feel that their governments are adequately prepared to respond to the climate crisis. And we feel that this might be indicative of the fact that people have already had to come together in their communities and be prepared to respond to things like Hurricane Fiona, flooding, and warmer winters. And even though there is work being done at the different levels of government, residents aren't necessarily aware of that work, or they don't feel supported by it in their daily lives. And so we think that this is really indicative of the need for more, whether action and education around what is being done to combat and adapt to the impacts of climate change. And to follow that, we asked if respondents were familiar with the updated climate action plan that the government of New Brunswick released in the fall of 2022. And only 19% of respondents were aware that there were a new climate action plan. And so following that last point, this is also indicative of the need for more public education, so that residents know what work is happening, how it can help them respond to climate change, and how they can support the government's efforts to do so. Again, quite illustrative of that need for more education is the fact that prior to responding to this survey, only 21% had ever heard the term nature-based solutions to climate change. And this was following, in the ability to hear a definition of nature-based climate solutions and see infographics describing it, in the hopes that we could avoid any confusion regarding jargon and just get, understand whether people were familiar with the concept. However, there's still very low amount of people who are familiar with the term or the concept. In the public survey of opinion, we provided a couple scenarios to kind of understand what might go into the decision-making process for an individual resident in terms of whether they would support a human-made solution or a nature-based solution. And the first one was, imagine for a moment that you had to choose between two possible solutions to an issue in your community caused by climate change. It might be something like controlling flooding, as an example. One solution is a nature-based solution, and the other is human-made infrastructure. Both solutions are expected to cost approximately the same, and both are expected to be equally effective in controlling the flooding. Which would you choose? And you'll see that by far, the majority would favor the nature-based solution. And although there is a large amount who would somewhat favor the nature-based solution, and it's not a huge majority that would strongly favor it, what I think is also important to note is that very few respondents chose the options that would favor the human-made solution. And this is without information in the scenario regarding the benefits that nature-based solutions could bring for the communities, or the specific challenges of the solution. So I think it's very interesting that although there was a lot of lack of knowledge regarding nature-based solutions by respondents, that they would still choose to implement a nature-based solution over a human-made one. The second situation that we provided was a situation with two possible solutions to an issue caused by climate change. In this case, solution one can be implemented more quickly, but will be less effective in the long run. And solution two will take longer to implement, but will ultimately be more effective. And solution one alludes to a human-made solution that can be, put into place very fast, but might not last in the long run or might reduce in its effectiveness. And that solution two, referring to a nature-based solution that might be more complex to put into place and might take a little longer to be effective, but will be more effective over time. And you'll see that the majority, again, would favor that solution to the nature-based solution, which might take longer to put into place, but would be more effective over time. And although it is, again, more of a somewhat favor, you'll see that there is very few who would favor the solution that can be rapidly implemented, but might be less effective. And so this is indicative of a general willingness to see through the most effective solution, even if that result might not be as immediate as we might want. One of the most interesting questions, and the one that we were most excited to get the results for, because it contributes directly to the development of our cost-benefit analysis framework, was looking at what were the most important benefits to respondents when deciding between various solutions. And these are things, the benefits, the co-benefits, we call them, which are as a result of the nature-based climate solution, although they might not be the intended purpose, implementing things like, new wet stormwater retention ponds that provide also opportunities for recreation, as well as more habitat for non-human species, whether it be, developing more urban forests or a living shoreline, has those other benefits that aren't just responding to flooding or responding to erosion. And so we provided respondents with this list of co-benefits, and they were asked to rank the 3 most important ones to them. And those benefits we gave were improvements in physical health, mental health, and overall well-being, improved water and or air quality, increased economic opportunities such as jobs, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, more opportunities for local residents to be involved in the planning and operation of the solution, increased biodiversity and habitat for non-human species, increased green space and parks for recreation, lower cost to construct the solution, a shorter time frame to construct the solution, and decreased temperatures. And you can see on this chart that by far, respondents chose improvements to physical health, mental health, and overall well-being as being the most important to them in terms of the benefits that could be provided by nature-based solutions. A close second was improved water and or air quality, as well as increased economic opportunities such as jobs. And you'll note that those top 3 are those that would have a direct impact and benefit to the quality of health and life in the communities for human and non-human species, is shortly following those top 3 of improvements to health, improvements to water and air quality, and increased economic opportunities are things like reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, increased biodiversity and habitat, and increased green space. And what is also, really neat to see here is that the things that our decision makers often think of as the most valuable for voters and for their constituents in terms of what is chosen to be put into place are things like lower cost to construct the solution and shorter time frame. But these are ranked very low. They're basically the lowest ranked in looking at the most important benefits to decide between various solutions. So overall, there does seem to be a desire and support for nature-based climate solutions, but a need for more information, education, and communication, not only of existing projects, but also of what our governments, what our community organizations are planning to do. And so I think this overall shows a very positive result in terms of the potential future for nature-based solutions here in New Brunswick. So I want to just give a couple short points about the next steps of this project and what's coming up before moving into the question and discussion period of this webinar. As I mentioned, the end goal of the Research and Knowledge Initiative is to develop this cost-benefit analysis framework that can be applied in decision-making at the municipal level. And so we're currently in the stage working with consulting firm Green Analytics to develop the framework, where they're gathering the information from existing databases and research on nature-based solutions, interviewing municipal leaders who have implemented these solutions to understand the real-world costs of the solutions, and really pulling these all together to develop guiding documents that link users to information on materials, contractors, designs, benefits, challenges, developing case studies of projects that exist. And then we'll be working with municipalities to review the framework and give us feedback on, what guidance documents we and where it can be improved. And then we'll be testing the framework, applying it to projects in New Brunswick in different communities to see how it would work in actuality and how we can ensure that it's the most useful. And then this testing and development stage will be completed over the summer. Moving into early fall, we'll be launching an interactive web tool version of it and providing training on the framework to organize other organizations, municipalities, and launching some videos and training materials through our websites. And then overall, we'll be providing mentorship and opportunities for learning for municipalities and supporting them in the implementation process and decision-making around nature-based solutions. There are also a couple events coming up that we're leading or taking part in. Next week here in Moncton, Climate Atlantic is hosting an adaptation conference where we'll be sharing our some details on our cost-benefit analysis framework. And throughout June and July, the NBEN, as partnered with NatureNB and Climate Atlantic, will be running a webinar series on examples of nature-based climate solutions across Atlantic Canada. We've just launched it on our website and we'll be sharing the link in the chat, but we'll be covering the topics of things like dune restoration, living shorelines, rain gardens and bioswales, mapping natural assets and responding to the impacts of climate change, and hybrid infrastructure, and hearing directly from the communities that have implemented these to understand what some of the challenges were, where they access the resources to do the projects, and what the results and successes have been. So highly encourage you to check those out if you're at all interested. And with that, I would love to take any questions or hear any comments or thoughts from you folks. And following the sharing of these results, you're welcome to raise your hand and I'll call on you to ask your question, or you can write it in the chat. And feel free to speak in the language of your choice, but do remember, if you're on the English channel, please speak English. And if you are on the French channel, please speak French. If you're in the bilingual non-interpretation channel, you can speak either language. Yeah, thank you again for being here and love to take any of your questions. Yes, Sabine.
Thanks for this, Lily. I think this is great. A great piece of a poll. I thought there was a poll done at some time, or Louise Comeau had done some work at UNB on nature, maybe not nature-based solutions, but something like that. But I forget. Anyway, so I think this is really great. I think I'm actually a bit surprised, quite surprised. One was your really low number of people who knew about it and knew about the climate action plan that the province has. That's like a bit scary, but that's also, I guess, the lack of communication from the provincial government. And the second is just your sort of that clear indication that there seems to be a preference for, and then a real interest in looking at the nature-based solutions, which I think is really important. It's really important to know. So yeah, thanks for doing that. I'm looking forward to seeing sort of the incorporation of that information into the next steps.
Thank you. And yes, we found those things quite surprising as well. Tim, you feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, it's a follow-up to Sabine's comment. First of all, I really appreciated the session that you have just given. I'm wondering about, it seems to me that there are groups, particularly advocacy groups, that seem to be more aware of some of the possibilities in nature-based solutions. I'm not so sure that it necessarily gets passed down the line to officials or politicians. And I'm just wondering what happens to sessions like this? Do they get sent on to MPs or Department of the Environment, or what's the relationship there between NBEN and the political or the municipal governance?
Thanks for the question. The first thing I'll note is that as a whole, the NBN is not an advocacy organization.
No.
However, that doesn't mean that we don't share information with decision makers. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, our project does have representatives from the Climate Change Secretariat at the provincial level, which is the Department of the Environment and Local Government. And we have representatives from the Union of Municipalities of New Brunswick and l'Association francophone des municipalités du Nouveau-Brunswick. So we have presented directly to the members of the Union of Municipalities, and will be reaching the members as well of l'Association francophone. And the members of both those organizations are mayors and councillors of municipalities across the province. And we are preparing, we are hoping to prepare a kind of briefing document on the results of this survey that can be easily distributed to whether it's MLAs or councils. That's kind of one of the next steps of sharing these results. Again, it won't be taking an advocacy stance as so much as sharing the results and sharing as well the work that we're doing in this project that is ultimately to benefit municipal decision makers. So in terms of this project specifically, which is all I can really speak to, we are working quite closely with representatives from both the provincial and municipal level. And there is an interest at both. But I mean, obviously municipalities are varying because there's so many across the province, but on the whole, there is interest from that, you know, municipal organization level as well as the provincial government to see this work forward. So, but you're right that there is definitely a challenge in ensuring that the discussions that happen in spaces that are, you know, between NGOs or with NGOs and residents don't always get communicated and down the line. So we're hoping to make sure that with this project, because we're working so closely with representatives from the province and organizations, that this information can directly impact the work that they're doing.
Excellent answer. And I really like the idea of briefing notes as well, because it's, yeah, it'll be very manageable for someone whose position is not necessarily always environmental, you know, so thank you.
Welcome, and we'll definitely, once we have that prepared, we'll have it available as well. Although we are not an advocacy organization, people are definitely welcome to use the results of this survey to assist with their efforts. So we will have the whatever briefing note. It's like if anyone who's here tonight would be interested in using it to work with your local council, it will definitely be in touch.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Are there any other questions? I will also write, I mean, you've all been getting emails from me, but I'll just write my email again in the chat, and you can reach out anytime if you have more questions about the project as a whole or this survey, and I'm happy to answer them. All right, well, if there aren't any more questions, I'll just thank you all again for being here this evening and for taking the time to listen to the results of this survey. there will be a recording. So if you know of anyone else who'd be interested in hearing about these results, feel free to share it with them. I will send it out in the next few days once we have it ready. And I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you.